appreciate being invited, and always look forward to meeting and talking with other investors and note investors in particular, because it's kind of a niche, right? Like it's like off the beaten path of investments for what most people are aware of. So let me go ahead and get started. So you always have to start a presentation with a gratuitous quote, which makes you appear much more knowledgeable and interesting than you actually are. So this is one of my favorites because I do try to learn from what other people do. This is Benjamin Franklin, who was a famous saxophonist back in the day. I don't know if you remember him or not. I'm kidding, of course, founding father. And I will do one more gratuitous quote later on. This is a picture of me from a little while back. Phil had asked earlier if I wanted to talk about myself, so I'll spend most of the time on this slide. But so I went to the Air Force Academy and then went to University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where I was working on a master's degree and also was active duty Air Force officer there. Didn't get to fly, but I was working on the Nellis Ranges where they hold all sorts of exercises, and many of my friends and fellow grads are still flying these days, mostly for the airlines. After that, I went really back to working for the federal government. And I've been at a few different agencies, Department of Justice. When Obama was the president, we had all those, remember the Recovery Act? There's all sorts of money from the Recovery Act that went out. So I was in the grant making arm of the Department of Justice. It's called Office of Justice Programs. And so, our grants doubled. They went from like $3 billion a year to $6 billion a year. It was insane. And then I went from the frying pan to the fire. I was the deputy CFO at ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Now they've added explosives, which sounds like fun. And then Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And now I work, I'm still in the Department of Treasury now. I work for a bank regulator, so I don't go into that because I want to make sure you guys realize I'm not speaking on behalf of the agency that I work for. That's my disclaimer. I'm speaking on my own experience, my own personal experience, nothing to do with not representing the federal government or my agency or anything like that. So I bought my first property in Las Vegas in 1994. I put the interest rate in here because I was hoping there would be very many young people in here that wouldn't believe it. So, because 8.5% seems insane now, right? For somebody with decent credit buying a 30-year note, like people would just be like, "That's crazy." I remember in the last year or so when rates started kind of ticking back up, and it was like 3.5%, 3.75%, and people were like, "Oh, crash is coming." And it's interesting if you've got a long enough view, which I think most of us do. You see things a little differently than that. So that was my first property. It ended up turning into a rental. I think I owned it for 10, 12 years. We ended up moving back into it at one point in time during moves between DC and Las Vegas. And oops, I missed one. And then as Mel mentioned, I am an avid cyclist. If you ever find me on Facebook, almost all the pictures are me sweaty with a helmet on. And I'm a runner, investor, obviously, husband, 26 years we've been married. We got married in Las Vegas. My daughter was also born in Las Vegas. That was not at the same time, by the way. So there was a gap of a number of years between those two things. And as Melanie mentioned, my daughter's a senior in high school, and so she's all excited about college and the college experience. So to get started, I'm going to dive into like the one niche that I kind of got some proficiency in and did fairly well in. But I want to give you a little bit of background from where I come from. As our wonderful host mentioned, I've done a few different things. So I did do a number of fix and flips. At one point, I had a $500,000 line of credit with a local bank that basically I could buy whatever I wanted with the $500,000. I just had to create a deed of trust for them, which was awesome, right? That's great for fixing and flipping. You could buy it, and this was back, this is back 15 years ago when houses could be bought for under $500,000. I've had a number of rentals. I've done some larger multifamily. I've done self-storage and mobile home parks more as a passive investor. So as a limited partner and a syndication sort of thing. The little flyer there on the right side of the screen is an example of a home. I think I bought it for like about 200, 210. I'm really good at cleaning stuff. I'm not good at rehabbing. So whenever any house that I would ever advertise would always have great landscaping, right? Because I could hire landscapers, I could get it cleaned like crazy. And actually the very first home that I flipped, I sold it on Easter Sunday. And I remember that because I was going to hold an open house, and my wife, who's Catholic, said, what are you, crazy? In Easter, nobody's going to be there. You're insane, right? Like, this is dumb. Stay home. I went out, sold it like almost immediately. The only thing I had done to that house was landscaping, painting a little bit, because the shutters on the outside, this was in Maryland, Beltsville, Maryland. The shutters looked terrible, right? Like they haven't been painted forever. Cleaned out all the stuff, walked people through it, advertised as a handyman special. And so I got all these people who will probably never fix up the house, but and it was priced well. So that really opened up my mind to a lot of getting creative. Like, there's a different way of doing these things than maybe what you read in the books, right? Because everything I read in the book was you rehab everything and you replace the cabinets, and you do this with the flooring, and you pick out the granite, like, I was going to do that. Actually, my partner at the time, his wife was an interior designer, and she always got disappointed because I would sell the places before she got a chance to jump in and start doing her thing. So that was my thing, is, hey, I get 30 days to try and sell it. And if I don't sell it, then you can come in and we'll fix it up, right? So that it obviously wasn't in the fixer market. So anyway, that's an example of one of the homes I did in Las Vegas. This dives into a little bit more on the note side. I put this note up here because this is the biggest mobile home note I ever did, at $60,000 for a mobile home. It was a new home. It was the only time I've ever gotten sued as well. So lots of lessons learned from this one. But as you can see, I've as I listed on the other side, created mobile home notes, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more because some people, that's a little different ballgame. I bought notes from broker dealers and from park managers, so people are actually park owners. I fixed and improved notes, and for an example of that, sometimes in the mobile home space that I was dealing in, contracts were done on napkins, right? Like they weren't marketable. They didn't have all of the truth in lending type of stuff that you would need to have in a note for it to be marketable, and for it to basically, when I mean marketable, I mean I could sell it to somebody else, right? That would actually be interested in buying it. So I did some of that. I did sell those notes. I would package notes up and sell them off to another investor at times. And then I sold a few houses. And this is probably what David's going to get into next week. Some sort of seller financing, either a wraparound or a land contract. You might hear that called contract for deed. A variety of different ways. Basically, with the land contract, I retained title to the property. And so it was basically a contract for them to get title once they had satisfied the loan. And usually, that's usually done through a refinance as opposed to getting paid off. So I've done a few different things in notes. I will mention Joe mentioned, who was it? Peter Fortunato, right? John Bailey was another guy who was fantastic 15 years ago. I know he's very poor health. He's out of Salt Lake City. He actually has a website. I think it's called The Paper Game. And he's got a ton of free articles and stuff like that. Very creative guy. I think he and Pete Fortunato may have been of the same mind on a lot of their investing. But he's kind of the one, he's the guy that kind of taught me how to play with yield by messing around with interest rates and term and stuff like that to basically drive up the yield on notes. Again, that's John Bailey, BHLE. I think it's called The Paper Game. He had a book out at one time. I don't know if it's still available. So those are a couple of kind of overviews of things I've done. And there we go. So I started with mobile home notes, as I mentioned. Very simply, I would pay cash for a mobile home in a park and only pay like typically $2,000 to $5,000, right? Which seems kind of insane. Now there's a reason these homes are so cheap, and get to that in a minute. And it's not because necessarily of condition or location. Generally speaking, you can find homes that are this cheap in many, many parks that aren't, you know, they're not going to be your super nice retirement villas that you see in Florida. They're going to be in C areas, right? Areas that are a little bit rough, but you can still find. The second step, oops, sorry, I'm clicking too fast. Second step is I would hire a handyman after I bought this place to do repairs and show the homes. And when I say show the homes, I mean lock it back up when they got done, right? So I would have a flyer sitting on the table or on the outside, handyman that was in the park. So I would just go around the park and say, hey, is anybody interested in fixing up this place for me? I have some, you know, some tile that needs fixing or window that needs to be replaced or whatever. I'd find that guy. There's a million of those guys in every park, by the way. So easy to find somebody that had like some fix-up skills. I did sell a couple of homes to those guys because they would be like, hey, this is nicer than the one I'm in, or this is, you know, or my cousin is interested, or that sort of thing. So it was a way of me doing a couple of things. It was a way of getting my place fixed, and it was also a way of kind of advertising, word of mouth. And then I would just turn around and sell that home after doing minor repairs, basically making sure that it was habitable. And then, you know, you could bump it up 3 to 5 times the purchase price. Sometimes it was a little less than that if you were at the higher end. But typically it was only $1,000 down, 12.5% interest. Why 12.5? Because that's what I was told was the industry standard at some point. So I used 12.5 and 5 to 7 year term. So the idea here was to keep the payment. So just to explain, if you aren't familiar with mobile home parks, if you buy a place in a mobile home park, you're paying for the house, and then you have a separate bill for the rent for the lot, right? So the actual piece of earth that this home is sitting on, you have to pay lot rent. The reason the homes are so cheap is because the lot rent is expensive. Okay, so in a typical park, you might see lot rent of say $400 or $500 a month. And so you had to be careful to keep the total payment between lot rent and the note payment on the home right around the 2-bedroom, 2-bath cost of an apartment that would be in the same type of neighborhood, right? So there's a cap to what you can charge people based on what the competition is doing and what their alternatives are. So that's kind of why you would see the home prices would be really low. The other reason they're low is because there's no financing available for old mobile homes. And when I say old mobile home, I mean something that was built like in the 70s, 60s, things that are very old. And so there's very little financing, and high lot rent drives down those prices.
So Andrew, I think this will be a really good thing to understand. So if you have, let's say, a $20,000 note at 12%, 12.5% interest at 60 months, I forgot to take the 1,000 down. It's somewhere around $400 a month, right?
Yeah, so you would do a longer term on that. So when I say 3 to 5 times purchase price, most of my notes were around $10,000. They were like $8,000 to $10,000.
Okay.
So you should get a, most of my notes were paying between like 170 and like 210.
Okay.
Does that make more sense?
How long would the term would be, like closer to 7 years then?
7 years, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, typically 7.
Okay, and then, so what the lot rent would be, let's say 500, and then 210 would be the, for the
closer to 300.
300. So give us a range of what people, you know, what people would be able to pay if they're paying lot rent and the mobile home.
Yeah, and so this is done. So you obviously have to take the market into consideration, right? So that's a huge factor with this. So the places that have dealt in were between DC and Baltimore. So there's a long corridor of about 40 miles of along between DC and Baltimore. So there are a number of parks right on Route 1 actually, and then out in Las Vegas. So Las Vegas was a little bit less expensive market than here in the DC, kind of north of DC area. So yeah, you'd have to do the math on this, and so that means you may have to pull the term out a little further, right, to drop the payments on it, which I didn't mind doing because I always like to give people incentives to pay off early. So I would always offer a discount if they would pay off early and that sort of thing. But yeah, you'd have to make it work and make sure 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment was about the price you were trying to shoot for, because the people that are trying to live here don't want anybody living above them or below them or next to them.
Right.
Okay.
So do you, Did you service these yourself, like keep track of your own books and such, or do you have a servicer? I mean, I don't know much of the servicing rules for mobile home parks.
Yeah, so you could use the same, and I'm actually going to touch on that a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, so that you could. I definitely used a servicer once I got a little more savvy, and I was still using Notesmith on my own to track things and keep check on my servicer, because I always figured, how long does it take to put in a note? But the idea was to get that third party validation of the payments, and so then when I would create a payment history and hand it to somebody, they felt a little more secure that the payments were real, right, and they were coming in, and that the notes were seasoned appropriately, if you will.
Right.
Any other questions? I am going to stop in a couple of slides and stop for questions, but anybody, please jump in if you do have something as we go. Okay. So what could possibly go wrong with this? This is a genius plan, right? What could possibly go wrong? Another thing I've learned in any kind of investing, something can go wrong. There is no free lunch, right? That you're going to be perfect. So what I just described is called a Lonnie deal. You may have heard of Lonnie Scruggs. He was a very well-known player in the mobile home space in the 90s and early 2000s. It was a Lonnie deal, but to me, it was not ideal. He did a book called Deals on Wheels. And I think this is still available on Amazon and other places. And I still think it's a great tool for understanding the power of finance, right? So understanding how to tweak notes and how to improve them, how to drive yield, I think is really good. So here's an example. When I'm talking about a mobile home, I'm talking about these older single wides in a halfway decent park. I paid $3,000 cash for this one. It's actually in very good shape inside. I mean, you can look at the landscaping, right? There's no spare tires laying out in the front yard or anything like that. People have taken care of this place. This was in Las Vegas. And this was how I would advertise it, right? So I'd buy this for $3,000. I would maybe put a few $100s into it, mostly with cleanup again. Cleanup, sometimes I would rip the carpet out, especially if they had pets, because they would be funky. But this is how I would sell it. And this is from the flyer that I had and then on the other side of the flyer, there should be a picture of the home, which I peeled this off of. On the other side of the flyer, I would basically describe the financing, right? So I would show them $1,000 down, balance of $7,900. Here's your interest rate. Here's what your payments are. Here's the term. It would lay that whole thing out for them. And it would tell them to go talk to the park manager and get qualified. Okay, so that's one of the things that became an issue. So a few lessons I learned the hard way here. So this is kind of where I got the name of this, other than being in Las Vegas and rolling the double fours, ate the hard way. So one of the things I learned the hard way is that the guy you're looking at right now, if I went and bought a mobile home in your park, I was probably the most credit-worthy person you had seen in half your lifetime. And so they liked having me paying the rent on the lot. I didn't like paying rent on the lot. And then I learned this the very first home I bought here in Maryland. I kept sending buyers to the park manager. Park manager has to approve a buyer. So I would send them a buyer. Buyer would tell me they had decent credit. They would have the money for the down. They'd go to the park manager. Park manager would turn them away. Say, no, you're not qualified. And so this happened like 3 times, right? So I'm paying the lot rent. I'm paying the $400 a month and keeping this. And so finally I went to this guy, I said, hey, what's going on? And so I pulled credit on one guy and said, this guy's got like a 650 score, which is a fantastic score in this segment. This is what's going on. And he's like, well, we would rather have somebody with a higher score that comes in behind you that has a score like yours. And I was like, that's not gonna happen. So I had to kind of give that park manager an incentive to approve somebody, which I had to help him out a little bit and fill up his tank or get him a 12-pack or something like that to make sure that he approved my next person that came in. So that was a big issue, right? So if I'm paying $400 a month on a note I'm only going to collect $200 on, and you do that for a few months, your deal goes south kind of quickly. Things don't look as positive especially you're dealing with these small notes, right? Like I'm not dealing with a huge note. So that was a pretty big issue, and I didn't like doing that. I wasn't crazy about rehabbing. I think I told you guys earlier, like I'm good at hiring cleaners, but rehab and picking stuff out and figuring out, you know, and I think if you do the math, the return on investment is much higher for cleaning than it is for rehabbing. So that would be my I hate to say that in front of people that rehab, uh, but I think I think the margin, you know, if I'm going to make 20,000 on a deal, I can make that same 20,000 or 40,000 or whatever by cleaning it up and selling it to somebody who thinks they're a rehabber, or wants to be a homeowner that does that, you know, kind of fix up on their own, versus actually doing the complete fix up and all the holding costs and everything else that are involved when you have to do a rehab and do that longer. So here's my solution. So skip buying the home. If I don't own the home, I don't have to pay lot rent. So don't buy the home, right? So what I would do, and I'll describe it in deeper on the next slide. But what I would do is I wouldn't buy the home. I would basically just approach sellers, right? People that needed to sell. And I would tell them, hey, if you can find a buyer that qualifies with the park and has $1,000 down, I'll buy the note. And they would say, well, how does it work? This and that. And I'll say, well, how much do you need for the house? Right. And they would say, oh, I need this much. I said, okay, this is how we'll do it. So if they said they need 5,000 for the house, I'd say, okay, this is how we'll advertise it. The note's going to be for 7,000. We're going to charge 8 total, right? So I would fix it so that I would still be able to buy the note at a discount. They would still get what they wanted. And again, this didn't always work. There were some people who just, there were people that were like, oh, I want 15,000. I'm like, your house is worth 2, you know, it's like, there's just no way. But they had a bill or a medical issue or something like that, and they needed that kind of money. And I just would have to tell them like, it's just not going to happen. So I skipped the home park. And the reason I did this is because, one, there's no competition, right? There's nobody else doing this I could find. I trained a couple of people in Las Vegas. They figured it was too much work, or they didn't like dealing in parks, right? Like you have to have, you will learn empathy. You will learn to connect with people if you deal in mobile home parks, if you deal in C and D class property. People have issues out there that I've never dealt with personally. It was eye-opening. Probably greater education than on anything else is seeing, just people who, for one reason or another, are in a park. And I'm not saying that living in a park is always bad, because sometimes there's very nice parks. I mean, there's places where, they're expensive. There's, especially out where Sumed is, like there's some parks out in California that, the lots are $1 million lots. I mean, so, you gotta think of the market I'm talking about. Are we able to pay $600 a month, right? So, but anyway, there's high yield, small investments, right? So small downside, right? Like worst thing that could happen is the amount that I paid for the note at a discount. Probably not going to happen. Diversification across mobile home parks. If a park kind of was going bad, there was a crime issue, a park manager started souring. If they were having issues, there were so many parks, like in Las Vegas, there were 50 parks I could choose from. So I could move around a little bit. No lot rent, right? So if I don't own the home, I don't have to pay the rent. It just sits there. It accrues to somebody else, to whoever the current owner is, or to the park itself. No repairs. And all of that led to basically less risk, right? Because I wasn't on the hook for lot rent or repairs or anything else. And because I'm not doing repairs, I don't have any liability related to the repairs, because I've never owned the home. I'm only financing it. Okay, so this made a lot of sense to me. Once I figured this out, I was like, I got to stop buying homes. I have to just figure out how to become the middleman a little bit more, how to become kind of an originator. The cons of this type of investing are payer quality, right? So there's always, the way I learned it, people, the paper, and the property, right? Those are the kind of the 3 things we worry about with notes. So the people here are not always, this is C, D type of buyers, right? So they're going to have issues that come up. But every now and then they would miscalculate their taxes and they'd have a bunch of money and they'd pay me off early, and that was sweet. So there's good things to people that aren't quite savvy with money. Like sometimes they just go, hey, I got this $3,000 return, what can I do? Like, you can pay me off. Management approval is a con, because a buyer still would have to get approved by management. But now I'm not paying that rent, so they have a lot bigger incentive to get somebody in there paying rent. Okay, so the game has kind of changed a little bit. High lot rent is a concern because if somebody defaults on that note and I repossess the home, I'm basically buying back the lot rent, right? Like I'm stepping back into the position of the owner. And so I was always very reticent to take back a home. I would always wait and see if I could help that person sell it, right? And so I always told them, I said, hey, if you ever have to move, let me know. I'll help sell your place, right? I will give you flyers, I will put them up, and we'll get it done. And so I only had a couple that I actually ended up taking back. And that was after I'd moved away from the area and I had less ability to connect with people. It was also tough. I mentioned the payer quality. Sometimes these folks would disappear, gone. Never hear from them again. Like, not a clue. Good thing is I had title. so I just had to clear title. And by the way, when I was doing this, so whenever, one of the things I've had to learn when I watch presentations or I attend a seminar or a class is it's never 100% complete story, right? You never get all of the details and all of the intricacies. One of the things I did while I was in Las Vegas is I became a used mobile home dealer. And that meant that I could buy, sell, finance homes legally, no issues. The park managers would talk to me. The other dealers, right? The other mobile home dealers would talk to me. The movers would talk to me simply because I had paid the state, $500 and taken a test. But that was legitimacy, and I had to buy like a bond or something like that. But it opened up even the people down at the titling office, right? I would walk in, I'd be like, hey, Andrew Pugh, this is my company. I'm a home dealer. I'm trying to fix this title. How do I fix this? I can't find this person. It's been this long. And by the way, I have a power of attorney from them also. So how do I file this and get a new title issued, right? So they would help me out. This was all, the titles back then were, still pieces of paper in a file. And this was, 2000s. So it's not like it was that long ago. But that was just not a place that they modernized very quickly. The last con on here is lack of note buyers. So there was originally, so I sold all my notes to the same guy or people that trained with the same guy. His name was David Butler. He wrote a book called Tin Can Alley. And it is the most comprehensive book on mobile home investing that you will ever find, and financing and note investing. Tin Can Alley by David Butler. It was fantastic. I looked for it on Amazon as I was preparing for this. I think you can get one for like $140. Like so obviously it's limited. I don't know who has one now, but it was just fantastic because it went through all of the details about what sort of home you should be interested in. Now he was also like flipping them homes. Manufactured homes were not manufactured homes until HUD started certifying them, I think in 1970 something, 77, 78. Before then, there was no standard really. And then HUD basically created a standard. And so he would tell you like how to price homes based on their age, what things to look for, what the different models of or manufacturers were. So there was a lot to that. And that book was super helpful. And now, do you guys know who's like the biggest manufactured home manufacturer in the US now? Joe? Oh, can't hear you, Joe.
Yeah, Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett. Yeah, Clayton Homes. So, I like to think he probably learned a few things from me. No. Yeah, so and actually, and I don't know if David does this, but one of the things that the guys were doing in the Southeast, especially where land was cheap, and in places like Utah and Northern Nevada, when I was doing this, is they were buying plots of land and they were creating a foundation. They were dropping a manufactured home on it, and then they were selling those. Because once you actually attach it to a permanent foundation, it becomes real property. So you can you can move a double wide home in and have it secured on a foundation and ready to roll in a couple of weeks. Okay, so even doing modular homes, I think it's tough to hit that.
One of my friends was telling me about the developments in Houston that definitely seems to be the way they're approaching housing.
Yeah, it's Yeah, and if you fix it to the ground and you can, I mean, at that point, I think you can even get like FHA financing and everything. I mean, it's the difference it makes versus having it up on the stilts that it's, you know, and pulling the wheels off is a huge difference. So anyway, so that's how I tweaked my approach. Again, the big thing was to find a motivated seller, right? Like that's the game, whether you're buying notes or you're buying antiques or houses or whatever. You got to have somebody motivated on the other side of the table. I would do that by talking to park managers. I would put flyers in the offices or the rec center or wherever they'd let me. I'd stick a note up. If I'd see a sign out, I would drop by with my card, that sort of thing. I would talk to the handyman in the park. If I saw a mover, I would stop by and talk with them. And when I say mover, I mean a manufactured home mover, right? Like a guy with a huge truck that was pulling a home out. And basically my game was if you can put $1,000 down and you've been approved by the park management, right? So the park manager, what's funny is people would say, well, do I need to fill out an application with you? I said, no, you're going to owe that guy a lot more money than you're going to owe me. Right? If he'll approve you, right? And I knew what their standards were at the park, then you're good. So I made it as easy as possible for people to buy these homes. And so basically I would create the note and I would buy it at closing, as I mentioned. And of course I would get it at a discount. So if it was a $10,000 note, I was buying it for $6,000 probably. Pretty big discounts. There was nowhere else for them to sell it. You would not get anywhere near that price trying to get a cash buyer, or it would take you forever. And I would tell people that. I was like, well, if you think you can do better, like advertise it for a month and see how it goes, right? Like I'll be here. And so a lot of people would do that. They would put a little sign out and they'd say $5,000. And what that would prove to them in a month is that their home was not worth $5,000 cash. How much was it worth? It was worth whatever I was willing to pay for a note. Right. So they set their own market, right? So I'd encourage, go set the market. You can figure it out. What I had done, so at this time I wasn't working with investors. I hadn't gotten savvy or brave enough to do that. So I was just using my own funds. And what I would do is I would end up buying 5, 6, 7 notes, and I would contact this David Butler guy and I'd say, hey, who would be interested in this package of notes? Face value is X, average yield is Y. You know, who would be interested? And he bought one package from me and he referred me to a couple of other people. I would sell them off. I'd get all my money back plus 20-25%. And I would go and do it again. And so you could do this. So typically seasoning would need 6 months. So I know people are like, well, what was seasoning? 6 months was kind of the minimum, right? If you got 12 months, that was pretty good. But once you got there, your balance was starting to drop because they're small notes anyway with short terms, right? So it was kind of like, and I got to a point where, some of the notes, some of the guys I would work with would get picky on me, right? And they liked that park, but not that park. And they liked this one, but not that one. And so I would start kind of maneuvering myself to work more in the parks that they seem to like. And that was a lot of fun to do that. So to try and figure that game out. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions. I haven't been keeping track of time, so I probably need to do that. But any questions? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Stop me if I'm doing too fast. So this is the gratuitous quote number 2 by Nietzsche. So again, you have your way, I have mine. The right way, there's no right way, right? You can figure out some different ways. I've already mentioned I kind of did rehabs a little differently. And for those of you that don't know, Nietzsche was in a barbershop quartet or something like that. I think he was obviously a creative type, maybe a magician, I think.
Andrew, it's 8:20, so you've got maybe 20 minutes. I'm sorry, 10 minutes left.
Okay, I will get through this. I've already mentioned a few things. So by the way, again, disclaimer, these are the things I tell myself. Hopefully you've learned some of these things in the past already, but I have to kind of repeat these things to myself. Number one, if you don't trust somebody, don't do business with them. I mentioned that really big note earlier, big note for me, mobile home space, $60,000. I did not trust the person that was selling that home. And I put an ironclad agreement in place. And it worked out in the end, but we did have to mess with lawyers for a little bit, and I wasn't happy about that. So this is something that I'm really, really focused on now, is that if I don't trust you implicitly, like, not going to do business, not whether it's buying a home from you or investing with you or whatever. Second thing I learned was, with private parties, everything's negotiable, right? Like the sky's the limit. Banks, not so much, although small local banks, far more flexible than your big banks, right? Your big banks, they have their way of doing it. They have their SOP, their standard operating procedure for everything. There's nobody that has been given, the authority to do anything for the most part. That's not directly in their description, but private parties, you can always do that. Number three, always ask for a discount if you will do something, right? So if I'll do this, we take a little less. I bought a home out in Summerlin, which is a retirement community in Las Vegas. Summerlin, I think, is a standard name used in other places as well. And I bought it from the heirs to the property who were out of state, and they seller financed it for me. And then when we were getting ready to close, and it wasn't that expensive, it was like $150,000 home. And I think my note on it was like 120. And I said, hey, if I can find a way to pay you guys off like in 6 months, would you take 100 for this? And they're like, yeah, we don't want any, we just want to get out of this damn thing, right? We just want out of it, and we need somebody else to clean out the garage and to send us their stuff. So that was a $20,000 gain by asking one question. I made more on the discount on the note than I did on the home. So, ask for discounts. The next thing here, hopefully will pop up. Oh, so I missed one there. Oh, there you go. Whenever you're asked for something, ask for something in return. If this is, so my tenants, right? So in Las Vegas, tenants would say, hey, I'd like to get a ceiling fan in the living room. And I'd say, I can do that. It's only $20 a month, right? So if I had just said, yeah, I can put one in, then I'm not going to get anything. And the other thing is, are they going to ask me for anything else? Not after I've told them it's $20 a month. The number of questions I'm going to get for installing upgrades is probably going to drop off a cliff like that. Be very careful dealing with private parties, especially in difficult situations. There's all these foreclosure rescue laws that are out there now that came about around 2005, 6, 7 timeframe. If you're buying a home that's in foreclosure, you got to be really careful not to tell people that you're trying to save them from foreclosure or any of that kind of stuff. You're just there to buy a house, or you're just there to buy a note. You're not there to save anybody. You become a bit of a fiduciary when you start telling people you're saving them from anything. So just be careful with that. Something I remind myself. Disclose everything in writing. Get the other party to sign off on those disclosures. Okay, so I used to have a one-pager. When I was buying a house or a note, I would tell people, I am here to make a profit, a significant profit, by buying this home and reselling it, or buying it, fixing it, reselling. I was straight up with them. No way they could come back later and say, I had no idea he was trying to sell this for, I had no idea. But if I tell you right up front, yeah, I don't buy houses if I don't make a significant profit. I don't do it. I'm in business. And most people will respect that. And some people would be like, I want to sell it for the most I can get. And I'd say, I'm not your guy. Here's Bob, my realtor, give him a call. But anyway, I would always have them sign off on those disclosures. Mel, you mentioned this earlier, using third parties to document. So I never really did like kitchen table closings kind of a thing, right? Like I wanted to close at the title company for real property. For mobile homes, I did them myself. I would call a notary, or we'd head over to the UPS store to have documents notarized. But that gives you like legitimacy in the eyes of others. It gives you legitimacy in the eyes of the courts, by the way. If someday you ever end up in front of a judge and they see you've done everything, it's been notarized, it's, and the notary isn't your sister, things are probably pretty good. Keeping things simple. I've done some pretty fancy transactions, and those are the ones that gave me heartburn, because the seller could always claim, I didn't understand that. I actually had the big note that I mentioned earlier. Every time I would try to explain this to this person, she would be like, listen, I was a stockbroker. I owned a brokerage. I understand this stuff. You don't have to, I know, you don't have to, like, let's go, like, sign here, hand me my check, right? I should have like ran out the door as fast as I could, but I didn't. And it was a complex, I was buying a partial. Okay, so partials are a bit complicated. there were terms where if the buyer, who was her tenant previously, didn't pay on time, that then it went to her. She had to pick up the payments, right? And she had to make it whole. That's kind of complicated. And if you're sitting in front of a judge who doesn't understand financing and all this sort of stuff, it's going to look shady. Like the more complicated it is, it looks kind of shady to them. So I've kind of pulled back on that and said, like, I'm keeping things simple. And because Albert Einstein said, make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler, right? So I tend to think in terms of, if somebody were going to look at this as an outside party, does this look fair? And that's where that disclosure document comes in, where I tell people straight up, I'm here to make money. I'm here to make a profit. I don't do it greedily. You know, I don't stand on the table and anything like that. But, you know, I'm very clear and direct with them. And I also offer to point them in a different direction if I'm not the right guy for them. No problem doing that, right? Like, I don't want anybody to suffer with a home they can't afford or whatever, but I might not be their guy. So you guys mentioned earlier, I am transitioning to multifamily. That's how I was fortunate enough to meet Mel and Phil. I'm not going to go deep into this just because of the time that we have. But there's a lot of things in here. One thing that I'll mention that really attracts me to real estate is that it's an appreciating asset, right? So it's a hard asset. It appreciates over time. I noticed with the notes, you know, I needed to keep reinvesting that money that came in because they're depreciating assets, right? They become less value every payment that you get. And with real estate, it's a little bit different. Obviously, a ton of financing available, ability to fix things. You can still get creative on fixing the management, the property up, that sort of thing. There's still a lot of tax advantages there that you don't get with notes. So anyway, that's part of my transition. It also happens that I have more resources now than I did when I was doing the smaller notes and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the direction I'm heading. And I think we are about done. That's my contact info. Sorry, I had to speed up at the end. I got all excited on the Lonnie deal. Took me too long to get through that. But any questions or thoughts? Any other quotes you want me to pull up for you?
So I want to know how you named your real estate investment company.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier, I'm a graduate of the Air Force Academy, and Air Force Academy grads are referred to as Zoomies.
Ah.
So the midshipmen are middies, and then the Academy grads are typically referred to as Zoomies, at least within the realm that I work in. And one of the guys that's a potential partner of mine is a grad as well. So we've kicked this around a little bit.
I just was like, I don't see Andrew as a jokester about having things on Zoom, and let's Zoomie together and talk about real estate. I was like,
Yeah, I wonder if that's going to throw people off. No, that's legit. That's real.
okay, I love it. I love it. Yeah, so connect on LinkedIn, you guys. You know, take his contact information, reach out. I've learned some new things today. We've not done any notes in mobile home parks, but you know, very interesting and very wise, some of the things you shared.
Yeah, and many of the things that you shared actually are applicable in any kind of note situation you're in.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things about notes and investing just generally with real estate is you do learn things that are applicable kind of across, you know, the way like the always, when somebody asks you for something, always ask for something back. For you guys as a couple, I think you should try that and see how it works.
Okay. Is there
I'm
any
not a
other
marriage
questions?
counselor. I'm not a marriage counselor. Let me just, not a marriage counselor. Yeah, any other questions or?
Very interesting. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you.
It was good.
Thanks
Interesting.
for joining, everybody. The Michigan Note Investor Forum. We will be hopefully seeing you next month. And thank you again, Andrew Pugh, for sharing about lessons learned the hard way in real estate and mortgage notes.
Awesome.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Andrew.